I think if anything from this last year, I hope that we could do better and more of is reaching out to each other as educators with similar goals, demands, visions for a more just world, a more just district, a more just classroom, a more just community for all of our students, and lean on each other, learn together through it, so that we're not more isolated.
Thank you for tuning into The Real Storytellers. This space was created to allow you to meet some real ones, those engaging in racial and social justice work, and to allow you to cultivate your own journey. These members are real, their stories are real, and their work is anchored in everything the real movement represents. Moé Yonamine is an Ukanachu Indigenous Islander who was born in the Ryukyu Islands and immigrated to the U.S. when she was 7. She is a mother of 4 and teaches in Portland, Oregon. She is an editor of Rethinking Schools and is part of the network of Zen Education Project teachers, developing original curriculum to reflect the diversity of today's U.S. students and to address gaps in the official curriculum. She has written several articles, including Uchinaguchi, The Language of My Heart, The Other Internment, and most recently co-wrote Dear Educators, It's Time to Fight for Asian America with Wayne Howe. She is the co-editor of the new teacher book, Finding Purpose, Balance and Hope During Your First Years in the Classroom by Rethinking Schools. Moé, welcome to the space.
Thank you so much.
You are very welcome. So we're going to jump right in. So Moé, what was the motivation that drove you to begin your organizing efforts with students to impact climate change on Indigenous people across the Pacific?
I think really the motivation started with the students themselves. I teach in a school that is very diverse in the many ethnic communities and cultures represented. And we have a very high number of Indigenous Islander students in my classroom. And about 7 years ago, with my global studies students, I had student after student that really, really want to talk about climate change as it relates to their own Indigenous homelands. And for me, as an Indigenous island activist, climate change has always been very important and near and dear to my heart, as well as the other issues that climate change impacts and vice versa. One of my students that I got to have for 4 years in a row, she, during our unit on climate change I had created, she expressed a lot of urgency for the need to see activists that look like her. And I remember distinctly there was a conversation around the depth of the issues and how different issues in the community, both in our own local community and in our ancestral communities, how they're linked together. And a couple of the boys, sophomores in the classroom, started to chuckle. And my student, to her, it was urgent and everybody needed to take notice and everybody needed to fight and pay attention. And even with the boys who didn't intend to be laughing, it was out of discomfort and nervousness. She literally hopped up on the desk that they were sitting at, jumped on the desk and said, "You will pay attention, you will listen. And what if this was happening to your people on your homeland? How would you feel?" And it was in that moment that I started to think about the ways that we teach about climate justice. And even if my own Indigenous island people have been impacted, affected, our young people need to see people that look like them represented in the curriculum that are mobilizing, leading, and participating in the uprising, not just island peoples of their own islands, but in solidarity with different Indigenous communities all over the globe. And so I began creating this curriculum, searching for a way to integrate into the students' learning about climate justice so that we see diverse groups of activists, fighters, everyday heroes showing up in their own lives and their own experiences. And I couldn't find much that already existed. And so I had to learn and re-educate myself in ways I never got to learn before as a student. I never got to learn about people that looked like me, had names like mine, had a movement story to tell, something to be proud of. And so I went searching, researched, created role plays and curriculum, brought it back to the same class to try again, same students to try again. And those students and we embarked on a journey of hunger, of wanting to know more. How come we had to come to this point to see and include more voices at the table? Why do we have to get there, and what else is still missing? And so these group of sophomores and I dove into then looking into the United Nations rights of Indigenous people. And for 15 and 16-year-olds to be willing to read 46 legalese articles so that they have a toolkit to fight with was really eye-opening. And it was from there, it's been a 7-year journey of class after class of students that have added, given feedback, changed the curriculum, demanded more, and has mobilized into nonviolent direct action from that curriculum that goes out of the classroom and into the streets for students to mobilize solutions, creative ways to make change, and also making demands from within our own school building of ways that climate justice needs to be embraced in our school and beyond. So really led by the students, and I want to give them those props first and foremost because they're leading with their heart. And once they see each other's stories and hear each other's stories, it has continued to snowball where students want to understand more and help each other in this fight for climate justice. Really beginning with the students.
I am so inspired by your work, Moe. Just hearing you admit that this is not something that was just given to you, provided to you. It required you to do some deeper learning and some deeper exploration, and your students helped to lead you in that regard is absolutely amazing. And more educators need to dive right in and realize that although we may not have all the answers and we may not know how to address a lot of what our students want to know and to learn, we can explore it with them. And the fact that you developed this curriculum along with your students who were amazing advocates for pushing forward what it is that they wanted to also learn just is absolutely amazing. And I'm glad that you have continued your work with your classes to follow the pioneers, if you will, who started the movement. And it just seems like you're just diving right into everything that racial literacy is all about, which is allowing people to tell their stories, the stories that are untold, the ones that we need to hear about our own race, about others' races, so we understand where we all come from, and at the end of the day, how we're all connected.
Absolutely.
All right. So with a focus on the Pacific Climate Warriors movement, what have been some classroom tested activities you have used to explore the historical and recent experiences of different island territories and nations?
That's a big question. Yes, and I really appreciate you lifting up creating the curriculum with the students, because it has been trial and error, for lack of a better word, of how to embrace the students, especially students who have felt very invisibilized in the K-12 public school education experience. How to embrace them, how to put them at the center, how all students can make connections without appropriating and without exploiting the students' experiences or putting them in a place of unwanted educator role where they're learning with us too, and it's messy, and they have so much to process along the way together in community. I think that the greatest things that have worked in our development of climate justice curriculum is one, we've started creating a photo gallery together. And through the research and the activists that students have learned year after year, they pass on to the next year of students what they want the next group of young people to know about the climate justice movements locally and globally. And locally includes students of their own high school who have led the way through climate strikes, climate protests, and demand for climate justice curriculum. And in it, when we created the photo gallery, the students got to contribute, especially from their home islands, both the beauty of their ancestral places they want people to know, about the pain and the harm, as well as historical violence and colonization. They don't want people to look away from, as well as the perseverance, the resilience, the resistance, the hope, the power. And time again, I've heard students from different islands say this is the most important, is that there are images of people that look like them, powerful in their own right. And so I've collected these photos over time and made a photo gallery that in this pandemic world has become a jam board, but we usually walk around the school hallway together so that everybody in our hall will walk through during break time and see what we're learning too. So we have a photo gallery that's visual so that all learners can enter in, and it's not based on literacy, it's based on your critical thinking and connections on the topic. And then we go into the role play, where in the role descriptions I created, and I'm still adding to them as I learn about more Indigenous activists across the Pacifica peoples, nations, territories, and sovereign islands. But usually, as best as we can, me, my students, both of us together, we reach out to the activists who are currently in the fight and the struggle to make sure that we're representing their story in the role play in the way that they would want to, if they want to share that, or people in the communities represented share any feedback for those roles when appropriate. And so we dive into the roles, we ask questions, we make connections, and we write interior monologues. And the interior monologues, I hear that New Jersey teachers maybe more and more might have access to the new teacher book. All the methods are incorporated in it. So like the interior monologue, where a student would take a role play and start writing a narrative to speak in the eye of what that person might be feeling, thinking, experiencing, to then share with someone else and relay and connect with them. So interior monologues have been a really beautiful way for students to express their empathy and really try to understand what that would feel like in these moments, in amplifying, and what we call be the mic, don't take the mic. And that's one of the community agreements that students made in this class, was not add something in that's not in the role from the activist quotes, but be that mic of what that activist would want someone to know in your interior monologue. So we've done photo galleries, interior monologues, role plays, and then there's the other component, which is now when we write about it, what do you want the world to know? So using writing as your microphone, how can you make your voice on your microphone clear, piercing, so that people way in the back can hear exactly what you want them to say, or what you want them to hear, and exactly in the way that you want them to hear it. And so we do the essay writing, the thesis wall, the evidence wall that's also in the new teacher book. And the students love essays with an attitude, because they can demand changes and they can put out to the world what needs to happen right now, from concrete steps of direct action to policy changes to everyday life practices to what kind of learning needs to happen from the youngest of our students. So we do this essays with an attitude, and then we always end with what students really have loved is the read around, where in circles you get to take a piece of your writing and then read it out loud, and then students all around the circle can express their love and appreciation for what you read into the circle. And when we do that, it feels like the learning is genuine, the learning is real. And even if you don't remember, the detail in the statistics of how climate change has impacted communities, I think many students will forever remember that feeling of how real it was and how they connected to each other and why these issues are so important. And then even more, how the issues are connected. One of the students, for her essay with an attitude during this virtual year, when I did the climate justice unit, she focused on immigrant people's rights. And she saw a connection of being from an island where people have been pushed out because there's less and less land on her island, pushed out before being able to go through the legal process of gaining immigration status in this country. And so while she's losing ancestral home, she also doesn't have a home here on legal record, legal documentation. And to her, she wrote that she doesn't exist. She doesn't exist on paper. And her homeland is about to not exist. And her whole essay was on her resistance to exist in all of our eyes. And so she was able to find her own path in the voice that she wanted the world to hear. And we heard it, even in this virtual world of a read around, students' cameras off, we heard it. And some of the students even turned their cameras on just to show the finger snaps up in the air. Maybe not their, eyebrows down, but we saw the finger snaps and the love just flooded into the chat. So all of those we've been holding on to, that students added to in the classroom that they love, that they didn't want us to take away in the years to come. But also we tried as much as possible to bring that into the virtual world so that we don't miss these students before they graduate, even during the pandemic.
Connection is everything. And you are connecting your students to you, to each other, and to things that matter in the world. And true learning, we know, happens when students feel connected. So kudos to you in leading the charge for them to connect with things that really, truly matter to them, because they're going to remember it forever. And they're going to also remember you.
Thank you. I hope
You're
so.
welcome. Now, Moe, what keeps you hopeful about the future when you think of your work?
I think hope has been, honestly, a question all year. I will say, just speaking for myself during this pandemic and seeing so many losses and pain in the community. But when we look closely, there are so many young people resilient through these really hard times. For me, I will never, ever forget the climate strike in Portland 2 years ago, right before the school building closed, I guess a little less than 2 years ago, when our Pacific Islander Club students led the whole school on a walk out, demanding climate justice education, K through 12, but also demanding that climate change as an issue be taken seriously in local and national policy. And as the students walked out banging on lockers, they had all these stories with them of activists that they learned about. And one of the students called it mentors of history, herstory, their story. And this isn't our ethnic studies class. Side note, we won ethnic studies 4 years ago and still going strong. All came from the same student movement. Yes, demanding climate justice education, as well as mandating ethnic studies for all juniors at our school. And as part of ethnic studies, we're redefining what the word history means. And so one of our students 2 years ago, coined it history, herstory, their story. And even in times where you maybe as a student haven't met activists that look like you, activists that speak to your heart from your own community, the student said, we can look for mentors of history, herstory, their story, because we have mentors that came before us. And we can lean on them to mobilize forward. So at the time of the climate strike, as students were organizing, our Indigenous Islander students, there was a lot of pain, a lot of feelings, I guess, for lack of a better word, that are really hard to label. As you organize, in the organizing is all of that together. There's the power, and then there's also all these things that you can't explain if there are no words to capture exactly how you're feeling in that moment. And they marched out. Majority of the school followed them. We are the furthest high school from downtown Portland. We are very, very central north in Portland. We call ourselves North Portland to distinguish ourselves as a diverse community, unlike the rest of the Portland city areas. And they took buses. They ended up downtown. And our PI club, that was Pacific Islander Club, that was 47 students strong, had prepared a resistance poem called 1.5 degrees Celsius, because in their fight to lower emissions, not at 2 degrees Celsius as a globe, but 1.5 degrees Celsius as a globe, following the steps of the Pacific Climate Warriors and their activism. And they did this poem in front of thousands of people that were gathered in downtown Portland. And after they did the poem, what a lot of people don't know is that the students walked off of there from the mic. And there was a moment where the students started to huddle up in the middle of the street and just poured it all out. They were out of breath. Emotions were flooding in, and physically unable for some of them to take the next step into the march. They gave everything that they had. And what we saw Islander students, Indigenous students, students of color from different schools came and huddled behind them, making a wall, barricading them so that no one else violates their privacy. And it was impromptu. It was young people connecting and recognizing that feeling, that soul in other young people. And that moment will stay with me forever, that hope of our youth in recognizing and connecting, being unapologetic to be there for one another when people need you for justice, in their fight for justice, was really amazing and hopeful. And I think for me, in this work for climate justice activism and climate justice curriculum, I'll hold on to that forever. That brings me a lot of hope in our youth.
Our youth are going to change the world. They truly are. They are so resilient and so brave. And, these children who are coming up are truly going to be the world changers. I truly believe that. And that story was just so powerful. So I appreciate you sharing that with us. Now, Moé, do you have any final thoughts to offer those who are watching?
Yes, I think we are this summer, probably a lot of us processing through what next year is going to be like, what this last year might have been like for a lot of our students and our families. For me, I have more questions than answers going in of how in the world did we sustain this last year, and how are we going to sustain this next year? And I think if anything from this last year, I hope that we could do better and more of is reaching out to each other as educators with similar goals, demands, visions for a more just world, a more just district, a more just classroom, a more just community for all of our students, and lean on each other, learn together through it, so that we're not more isolated. I think I'll speak as a teacher of color, as an Indigenous woman teacher. I felt very alone at times in the pandemic, where even more than before, I felt like I had to fight for so many individual students and for equity and the urgency in addressing equity gaps in everything that we do, that this is our time to learn, reset, and give the students the education that they really, truly deserve, and give them relationships, interactions with their teachers and their fellow students in ways that they deserve. And that was really hard to question and bring up over and over and over again. And what I found was phenomenal, amazing friends in places I expected, in places I didn't expect. In you right now, in sharing these stories together, even across this continent, I feel that right now, that we're not alone in the experiences and the struggles. And if we can tell stories, if we can connect together, that there's actually a larger community out there for us to hold on to. And that's what I'm going to hang on to in the next 8 weeks before school starts here on the West Coast side, and hoping that we grow our community more and more for social justice educators.
Moé, I appreciate you sharing your knowledge, your experience with us. We truly appreciate you being here in the space, offering all that you were able to offer us today. I do have a bonus question for you. In your work with the Zen Education Project, you have been working with other teachers to develop original curriculum to reflect the diversity of today's US students and to address the gaps in the official curriculum. With so many gaps in what is taught in US history, how should educators prioritize what they choose to focus on teaching in their classrooms? And should this be something left to individual educators to determine?
Those are really good questions. It seems like there's so much to consider and so much to prioritize, and everything, to me feels like a gazillion tabs open in my mind when I think about what to prioritize. And I think it's always on the students, and we have to know their stories, hear their stories as we develop and create the curriculum. I think it's not something that systemically is going to be given to us in a way that really genuinely nurtures the individual student lives in the classrooms that we're in next year. For me, there are some words that I found grounding. In the new teacher book, the introduction, it says, our communities need teachers who see the beauty and intelligence of every student, who walks through their doors, who are willing to keep trying to reach those who have already been told they aren't worthy. Our students need teachers who value students' home languages and who know how to build academic strengths from these roots. We need teachers who can learn how to develop curriculum that ties students' lives, history, and academic disciplines together to demonstrate their expertise when top-down curriculum mandates explode across a district. And I think that's really true right now, is how to focus on the beauty of the students that show up each and every day. What's important to them in their lives? What is urgent for them that they want to learn about? What are they hungry for? And what do they want people in their own learning community to know about? And if there's a priority we could give, I think it's going to be right there, especially in this time where connections were really taken away for so many reasons. Even to get on to Google Meets for my students, many of them did not have the technology, the access, the education, the technology education to know how to navigate just to get on for class. And we lost connections over and over again. And I think we're going to have to go in 200% to give all of our young people a chance to connect and be ready and present as teachers to hear them without a set plan, hear them and be okay with navigating with them as your curriculum changes over the year. We're in a time that we didn't expect. And I think we're in a teaching year that we probably won't know for sure how it's going to go. But as long as we stay grounded with our students, I think we'll have a lot to learn together.
I agree with you. I think if we keep the focus on our students and what they need, then we're always going to be teaching what needs to be taught, because whatever they need at the time is what needs to be taught. So
Absolutely.
I wholeheartedly agree with you. Again, thank you so much for your time, Moé, and we appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much, Angel. You have been absolutely phenomenal. Thank you for having this conversation with me.
Thank you.